Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Sean Hendricks, and as I mentioned in the last session, if you've been here for the last two sessions, you already knew that. I seem to be the one person consistently stuck to this chair for the whole day. So in this particular session, we are getting into the tips and tricks mode. The last couple of ones we were in more of a dev question mode. Now we're getting into let's just use some software and show you cool things kind of mode. So I've got a couple people with me here. First, at the far side, I have Craig Barr, who's on my team here at Autodesk, who is one of our technical marketing specialists. He's a voice you'll have heard many times on YouTube, the voice behind a lot of our new feature videos, a lot of the tips and tricks videos that you'll run across for Mudbox as well as for Maya. And over on this side here, we have Hughes Dubois, who is going to be working with us. He's a customer of ours. Many of you will recognize him from imagery on some of the communities, whether it's Area, CG Talk, you name it, you'll recognize the name. And certainly if you don't recognize the name, you'll recognize a lot of the imagery. So why don't we just pull up a couple images here.
Sure.
Hughes, if you can just make one of them big.
Of course. Here we go.
So, as I say, most people will probably be vaguely familiar with some of the work that he's done in the past. And one of our goals for these tips and tricks is to have at least one of our customers out there that uses our tools involved in the tips and tricks, because we don't want you to just hear kind of how we see a solution to a problem, but also hear from some of the other people out there in the trenches who are using these tools and doing the same kind of thing. So we're definitely going to be digging into that. Now, as always, simple ground rules for these things. I think Darwin and everyone on the chat will always post, everyone be polite, be nice, which actually everyone always has been. It's been very nice. Also, we aren't answering any questions on future product. We're not able to give you features for things that are coming up at some point in the near future or distant future. So feel free to ask those questions, but I'll probably ignore them in the chat. We've also received a number of questions ahead of time over the last few weeks that I've got a big list of here that we can go through, and I'll also try and keep an eye on the chat as much as possible, so if anything comes up there that we can answer, we will dive in and do that. So at this point, Hughes, why don't you just tell us a little bit what's kind of your focus as an artist? I know you're a freelancer now, you're doing freelance work.
Yes.
What do you focus on more than anything, or what do you like doing most?
Well, my personal work is generally stuffs that I try to. Sorry, I try to find my inspirations from various tribal and cultural aspects of humanity in general. I also specialize in computer and video game art that I freelance for on a regular basis, but yes, my personal work is generally oriented towards character creation with a cultural aspect to it.
Perfect.
And yeah, I use Mudbox generally as my core platform, and as well as Maya, and that's it. Yeah.
And yes, you will be seeing Hughes again tomorrow during our Maya tips and tricks session. He's doing double duty this week, so much thanks to you for that. So why don't we start by just talking a little bit about your workflow. Mm-hmm. We'll use this as kind of the warm-up for everyone on the chat and for everyone sitting here, is if you could just kind of walk us through your workflow, and in this case, obviously, in particular to Mudbox, kind of what you do and how you do it.
Sure. Well, generally, especially for illustrations like the one that you saw earlier, yes, this one, I do not have any particular approach that I follow. I have an image in mind that I start with. It's generally someone that I'm seeing in my imagination, but I do not get any deeper when I start the process itself. I just essentially consider anything that I do in Mudbox as silly putty in clay, essentially.
Area?
Essentially, yes. I don't plan anything. I just try and follow the image that I have in my mind, and quickly create very simple base meshes that I can quickly iterate on without even have to worry too much on about the topology, and then and pass it on directly to the renderer, paint directly on the object as I go, and render as I progress without really ever reaching the final points before I feel that it is really finished on screen. That's it, really. It's there's almost no intermediate, and there's no retouching. What I
Yeah, I know that's a common question people have. It's
Yeah.
like how much of this happens in Photoshop after the fact with layers, things like that.
No, not at all. It's essentially as I go in Mudbox, I pass everything onto the renderer that I use, and it's in that case
Can you talk a
it's
little bit about you're using Octane renderer?
Octane
out of
renderer,
Maya?
exactly. Yes.
And
well,
this
in
is
that
what you
case-
see is
yeah.
what you get. You're
Yes.
rendering, and this is your final
Yes.
image.
I pass the objects, I pass the textures, and it renders in the background. I make touch-ups to the object and the textures as I go, and then refresh them in the rendering engine, and there you
That's
go.
excellent.
And up until the point where I'm satisfied with the result, and I let the render refine, and
Right.
and that's it.
That's excellent. That's a great workflow. So you're essentially painting or adjusting sculpt on the fly and watching your actual render.
Yes, that's
Right-
one
right
of
out of Maya.
the fantastic one of the fantastic things that Mudbox and the pair with Octane allows is that I can really take a painterly approach to my creations.
Yeah. Excellent. Maybe we should go on. I'm not sure if you wanted to. Was there something else you want to show specifically, or I was wondering if you want to maybe, while we're on the painting aspect, talk about anything, any of your preferences or.
Oh, in that very case for this character, there is very little painting being done on the object itself. I think I have altogether in that scene probably 3 textures, and yeah, it's all here.
Excellent.
And there's one layer for. Hold on. It's not working.
You're using the main diffuse, the skin, to drive
There-
in
there's
your
exactly-
layered shader that
exactly,
you're using
and-
within the Octane renderer.
Exactly. There's one diffuse map, and there it is. And
Excellent.
as you can see, it's extremely simple, and there's nothing complicated to it. Most of the detail comes from the sculpt itself, which in that case has been translated simply to normals. The model that I used to generate the normals was actually fairly high polygon, was about 20 million polygons, but it was passed on to the renderer again as just one 4K map, I believe. And after that, I could just iterate directly on this data set
Excellent.
and filter them through the rendering engine itself
Very
to pull
nice.
as much detail as possible.
That's excellent. And you find with using those maps and using your rendering workflow there that it's you find it to be quite a quick updating process? With
Oh
the
yes, it's just a matter of 2 seconds at a time, and
Excellent.
it's fantastic. It really makes the whole process extremely interactive.
Yeah. That's great.
All right, shall we dive into a little bit of the questions that have come out so far?
Sure.
So if I go in here, one of the questions, and we have actually had a couple questions throughout all of our sessions today on this, which is around reality capture. I've seen some demos working with reality capture data. How is Mudbox useful for reality capture cleanup?
Okay. I will pull up Mudbox here on my screen. I have a really simple example of some recap data and how nice it is to work with Mudbox within recap data. This is something I've been asked about quite a few times. On YouTube, you can see a couple videos that I've done working with recap data, taking objects through Mudbox, bringing them through Maya, and right into the Unity game engine as a game asset there. So you can find some of those videos there from this past SIGGRAPH as well related to that. So the nice thing that I find with working with recap data in Mudbox is that you have this ability to kind of fix or correct meshes here. So this little well that comes in, you can see that it's coming in as a model. The original mesh is all of the, whenever you use recap data, you actually want as much noise going on in the background as you can get. So this original mesh, there's a bunch of, essentially artifacts or junk kind of laying around in the scene, and it's actually useful to grab all that data for the cameras to lock on and track for building that mesh and the resulting textures from the images as well. So I've just hacked that out and culled this guy down. Now the problem with sometimes you'll see with recap is you'll have some texture issues here. There's some missing texture data, but also the geometry, the mesh that's coming through. There may be some problems in here as well. So you can see that we have some holes going on. And within Mudbox here, you can actually turn on mesh errors. By default, that does come on when you import a mesh, and it's going to give you warnings like this. Things like it's missing UV sets. It might have issues with faces. There might be overlapping edges or unwelded vertices. There might be a whole variety of things in there. And then you're going to get these little red dots indicating issues with the mesh. So it's useful to have those things displayed. You know, things like this here with this, this mesh, holes in here on the actual old well there, that, you know, these holes don't exist. So just a couple tips on how you can work with that. If you're in any of the tools, right, if you're in the sculpt tray, for example, you know, we have this select and move tray, faces, objects, you know, borders, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. But if you're in the sculpt tray and you want to use the sculpt tools, but you want to work with faces at the same time, you can actually hit the V hotkey, and you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, it's going to update to my selection tool. So I can turn this from brush to you know, rectangular selection or lasso selection, but in this case I'm just leaving it as brush. And then I should point out I have my preferences set to render or define faces, and I'll show you where that is. If you go underneath the Windows preferences, just a little tip, the render pull-down menu, by default it goes to vertex. So just to show you what that is, oops, I'm using the sculpt, let me push down V. You actually get this kind of, you know, bleeding off edge there. I find it a little more visually useful to turn the render setting on here to by face. And what this will allow me to do is when I'm in that selection tool, I can rather grab the faces here. And before we actually get into grabbing those faces, let me just turn on the wireframe to show you what kind of result you get from recap. You can see we get this quite a dense mesh. It's all triangulated. But it may be a mixed geometry, right? You might have tris, it might be quads in there, n-gons, non-manifold geometry. Quite often it can be a whole shamble of different kinds of geometry in there. And that's the nice thing about this workflow in Mudbox. We don't need to care about that or worry about the topology in here. So, for example, if we take this hole in here, I'm just using the brush, the face selection. I'm using my wireframe on there. I'm not sure how well that wireframe is actually displaying on screen. Are we able to see it a little bit on there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And actually, Craig, just as you're doing this, I got a quick question online asking, could you define recap? Is it a term or a tool?
Oh, sure. That's a good point. So reality capture is what I'm talking about. Reality capture is this process that we, within Autodesk, we're doing a lot of research and a lot of work on reality capture in the way of being able to use regular, everyday photography to actually go and take photographs of an object, a real-world object, that within our cloud engine, we are able to generate a fully textured 3D model from this. And if you haven't tried it out, I encourage you to try this out. We have a consumer version you can use right off your iPhone or your iPad, as well as we have a professional offering now that produces excellent, really dense, high-resolution meshes and textures with that. So reality capture is what I'm referring to when I say
recap.
When I say recap there. So yeah, good point. If people aren't familiar with that terminology in there. So I'm just back to selecting faces here. So let's go back into that. So just really quickly on this here, if I'm working with selecting some of these faces in here, I don't want that hole necessarily in the mesh, so I can just quickly select some of the faces on there and just delete out that simple area in there. And if I grab my border tool and then just swipe over top of that border, and if I go underneath my mesh menu here, I can hit patch. And all that's going to do is simply just fill in that void or patch that mesh in there and fill it in with triangles. So we're now working with tris at this point in time. And another useful thing while you're on that, with that selection that you just patched, we have another tool in here. You'll see tighten and fair. And if I hit fair selection, what that gives me here is it will actually, you know, fair this based on the surrounding vertices, so that you're kind of getting you know, a mesh that's more conducive to the surrounding mesh.
Kind of
it blends it
maintain
in.
the tangencies.
Exactly. Blends it in there quite nicely with the surrounding mesh in there. So there's just a quick thing. Now that mesh is patched. What we're actually seeing, you see the wireframe on there. When you do this workflow here, the UVs are missing on that. So there isn't any texture information on this. So what I can simply do, if I just grab the model, and if I come underneath UVs and maps and go to create UVs, you actually have the option to create all new UVs on here, or create missing UVs only. So in this case, if I just hit that, it's going to ask me how many UV tiles I'm going to create. I'm just going to leave it as a default 1 for this example. And all that's going to do now is give it simply some UV texture coordinates, so that we're not left with what appeared to be kind of an empty or a hollow face in there. I'll just deselect the model and zoom in, and you can see now we're seeing the material on there. So I'm able to actually paint with that if I wanted to do it. And that's important because if we're working with the textures that came from the recap data, you can see it's just going to pick up the default material underneath. But the workflow here is I can correct the mesh or fix these mesh issues, but I can also correct the texture issues. So this isn't something that's that easy to do in a program or a package or an application that focuses only on mesh or topology correction. We can take advantage of the same ability to work with texture corrections in here, or missing textures, for example, or this texture area here is completely incorrect. So we can fix that rapidly. So let's move on here. Correcting the mesh there, filling in, patching holes on that topology. And then, of course, with Mudbox, we have the retopology tool set. I should point out, I'm running currently right here Mudbox 2015, the new release that's upcoming. And we do have a bunch of bug fixes in there related, I believe there's 9 specifically with retopology, which is really nice. So we're constantly taking a look at that and addressing any potential bug issues there.
One quick question as you're
Yep.
going. Someone asked, just to confirm, what was the name of that last effect? Fair? What was
Oh, fair selection. So that's just underneath the mesh menu, right underneath patch. We have Tighten selection and fair selection. So I typically will do a patch and then I'll run a fair on that just to match up any of my the surrounding mesh, surrounding verts. Keep it fair with the surrounding verts, as it were. So let's continue on here with, I think someone earlier said, this mud party here.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yes.
so moving on here, this is I'm displaying here a retopology mesh, just to jump forward in this. I'm going to turn on, because I don't think it's that easy to see my wireframe in there. So I'm just going to turn on the wireframe color. We'll make it a little brighter. That should be a little better, hopefully. And you can see now we have a quadrangulated mesh here. So we have quads, and what we're able to work with now is something that is a little more conducive to working within our world of 3D content creation. I can pass this off to Maya, Max, whatever it may be, and continue modeling with that, or take this to create a usable asset here for production, whether it's games or film or a prop or something in the background. We talked about the mesh side of it here. Of correction, but we can also work really quick. I'll just do this really quick so we can move on. We can jump into the paint tools, and the nice thing about this workflow here as well, if we have some textures that are missing on here, when I did the retopology on this, I actually transferred the textures over to this guy onto here, and then some of it was corrected, but we have these areas of patches. This is that hole we fixed. There's no texture data there. So the nice thing about Mudbox is this ability to quickly patch up the mesh, and then, rapidly go in and maybe, well, I'm painting on the speck there. Let me just paint the diffuse here. Use my clone. Oh, why aren't you not updating as we go on here? That's interesting. I'm not getting my clone brush.
That's because you had all the build-up, so now...
That's right, yeah.
The more you build something up,
There
the
we
more
go.
it's likely to go wrong on you.
There we go. So we're actually, there we go. If I just hit the control hotkey, select my space in there, and then begin to, just sample areas, much like the Photoshop clone brush would work in the same way. And of course, being the spec map, I just quickly generated that from the existing diffuse map with the adjust colors. But the point is, you can correct the mesh, and then you can go in and use all the different paint tools to correct or address issues in here. And you can also paint out shadows as well from that. You get texture data from real world. It's not going to be flat. You're going to have shadows in there, so you can readdress or repaint the mesh to work with that. So that's a quick overview of that process there for recap and Mudbox.
So I know another question we had come in earlier was around blend shapes inside of Mudbox. Specifically, they were saying that they had seen workflows of the Smog blend shape stuff from Weta, and were wondering how that really works.
Sure. Let me, maybe perhaps while I'm loading up a file here, Hughes, did you want to, you were talking about the eyeball on there. Did you want to just quickly go over the,
Sure, yes.
the eyeball, and I'll load up a file here with some blend shapes that we can look at.
All right. So yeah, I for one of the characters that I created a few weeks ago, I had to. One of my focus was to give him an intent, and for that I was faced with a little challenge to make sure that his eyes could actually convey the emotion that I wanted it to, and I decided to recreate a new set of eyes to achieve that effect. And with that in mind, I decided to go as realistic as I possibly could. and used Mudbox once again to actually sculpt the actual eye itself and all of its parts. And each eye ended up being only something like 60,000 polygons, but they do manage to withstand a fair amount of close-up, as demonstrated here. And
That's beautiful.
ultimately, the whole item was set up as a few layers that were all painted again in Mudbox. And it even comprised the retina at the back of the eyeball
That's a bit of
to
detail.
to achieve effects like this one.
When you hit the red eye.
Exactly, you could do red eye directly in the rendering engine. And yeah, again, it was all done in Mudbox and painted in Mudbox and sculpted in Mudbox, of course. Yeah.
There's something just wrong about the fact that their entire life in the real world is to avoid red eye, and you go and build it in.
Of course, that's the fun of it.
Excellent. That's excellent. That's beautiful. Back here, I have this a blend shape of our character Sven. We can use as an example here to ask about blend shapes with Mudbox. The question was, there's been some media around Smog with the workflow at Weta and some of the blend shaping, some of the work done there, the detailing, sculpting, different work painting, and using the blend shape, the layer ability within Mudbox to build blend shapes and bring them back to Maya. This is something I should point out that we've actually been able to do for a long time within Mudbox, is use the layers and to build morph targets and send them off to wherever you're going to go with that. But in the new release, we've actually tightened that process up a little bit between Mudbox and Maya. We introduced grouping, so you can group sculpt layers, you can group paint layers, and that's really handy to be able to organize things, much like a Photoshop workflow, right, where you're grouping your items and you're able to organize that. But it's actually a little more powerful with that. The first iteration here is that we're linking groups in certain manners. So one example here is with Maya. Maya will recognize your groups of layers that you have as a blend shape node. So for example here with this character here with Sven, the nice thing about working in Mudbox and working with the sculpt tools, it's very quick and easy to build up nice blends, right? Nice blend shapes overall, and then be able to actually blend those layers together so that you can subtract or take away or build multiple layers out of this or actually blend them together. So as a slight example here, we have this simple little smile left going on here. And the nice thing about that, we'll put this one up. If I duplicate that selected layer, it's doubling up the value here because I have two of them displayed. Let's take down our original smile left. With this one here, I can right click on that and I could do like a flip layer. And right away, I've sculpted one side, I've now built the other side. I could certainly sculpt that with symmetry, but why not sculpt one side and then just worry about mirroring it or flipping it over later? So that now I have the left side, I have the right side. And then of course, with that, I could turn on both of these here, and I could merge these together. I could duplicate both of these and merge them together, and I could have the left side, the right side, and then one that does completely that overall effect on here. So, and then what we can do with that there is build up this whole stack of blend shape layers or sculpt layers that will be interpreted as blend shapes back in Maya. And let's take a look at that here. So if we here, we'll just bring this guy down. We'll just zero him out here. So we have our grouped layers in here, and if I take my character, just to show how this works, if I go underneath the File menu under Send to Maya in here, and I'm going to go to the Preferences, you'll see down on the Preferences right here, if there are sculpt layers, flatten them. So this is great for the sculpting workflow back and forth. But we have this other option here, export sculpt layer groups on current mesh level as Maya blend shape. So by selecting that, I'm going to say OK. I'm going to leave the default by flattening any textures that may be there. So I'll say OK. And then back into Send to Maya, I will go Send selected as New Scene. This is something that's a lot of our texture artists are loving, is that we now have the ability to define texture paths. So much like Maya's project directory in a way that you can stack, and it doesn't have to be just in one area. I can create unlimited texture paths. So I might have, with your workflow there, maybe I have a specific eye directory, right? So I could have all my eyes textures just going there, skin textures going to one area. Maybe I have a special pipeline for another artist down the line where a certain group of textures needs to go over there. So anyways, I'm just going to leave this one here as default just to move on, hit OK. And then we can send this over to Maya. And what's going to happen if you look in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, it's going to show that it's connecting to Maya. And then once, so it's going to, right now it's sending out the mesh, it's sending out the textures. We're just going to let it connect, and there's the connection you see down the bottom right-hand corner, connected to Mudbox. And we're going to bring the file in. And then the nice thing about this is it's going to immediately recognize or appreciate the blend shape node there. So let's put our Sven character. We might as well turn his texture on here in Viewport 2.0. I'll just define this panel actually as a hypershade node. Or I mean, let's put this one. Let's not put the hypershade. Let's put a blend shape window in here. There we go. And I'm just going to change the orientation to be horizontal so that we have a little more real estate here when we work. And you'll see that all of these layers have come over exactly as we were working with them in Mudbox. All the names are preserved and everything as well. The cool thing about this is that much like the way we work with Mudbox and Photoshop, that kind of live connect where you can update back and forth, this is the same idea that we have going on in here. So I can add blend shapes here in Maya and update that back as a layer in Mudbox, or I can create a whole new layer in Mudbox or change those blend shapes and have it update back over into here. So what do we have on, you know, if we have this let's get something here, something simple like that with this guy here. So maybe I'm looking at this and I want to address that. Well, back in Mudbox, I can work with any of those layers here. I'll just deselect the model here. Let's grab this one here, and I can, you know, maybe I need to tweak that. I can certainly use the tools there in Maya to tweak that, but I can go in here and maybe duplicate this one here. Let's duplicate that. Turn that one off, and then make a whole different blend shape out of it. Maybe I want it to be, you know, more focused on one side here, for example. And we pull his nose out, some sort of proboscis-like thing, but we won't do that. We'll just leave it alone. And then what we can do here is update that back into Maya. And I can do that a couple ways. I can send it back to Maya this way, or I can go down to the bottom right-hand corner and I can hit the update button. And that's going to update back and forth. And in Maya as well, in the bottom right-hand corner, is the update or connect to Mudbox update. So anything I do here in Maya, I can update back live there as well. So there's you can see our updated blend shape, our whole new blend shape that we've created as well, because I duplicated that layer and it respected that and brought that in. So it's a nice workflow. You can use all the sculpting tools to do this, and of course you can use all the modeling tools within Maya to do the build your blend shapes as well.
Now, we had a question come in going back to the retopology stuff. Can Mudbox retopo geometry from something like Inventor to get clean quads instead of tries?
Yeah, as long as we can get the mesh into there, and I say that by out of the box natively, Mudbox is going to support OBJ, FBX. So if you bring it out of Inventor in that format, then not a problem. We can bring that in and work with that. Of course, you can build your own importers within Mudbox with the SDK. A lot of our customers will do that to bring in different formats as well. But the answer,
yeah,
yep,
perfect.
definitely.
All right, let's see what else we've got here. So can you tell us more about the Maya Mudbox Ptex Interop?
Okay. Yeah, maybe what we can do is take a look at this while we have this file open here. So there's a couple of things going on with you know, the workflow that we've had continuous between, for example, Maya and Mudbox with texture updating is much like what I just showed here, that send to Maya and the update ability. We also have underneath that same menu, you know, maybe you don't need to send everything. You can say just update the textures only in the current scene, and it will do that for you. But what we've done in 2015 is we've kind of tightened that up or made that a little more convenient to work. One of the things that we've done is multiple UV tiles so that Maya and Mudbox now finally respect each other in that way, that the multiple tiles in Mudbox are preserved and you can actually view them in the viewport now in Maya, multiple UV tiles. Specifically with Ptex, as asked there, this guy here has UVs on him, but it's exact same workflow, like it completely the same tool set, same paint layers, nothing's changed there. But the nice thing about this is, if anyone's worked natively with rendering Ptex or updating Ptex files back and forth from Maya to Mudbox, it was a little bit you had to jump around a bit before because it didn't update as quick, or you to render it as well. There was actually we had to you kind of had to hack if you were using your mental ray as your rendering choice. You had to kind of hack your Ray RC file, and there was a bunch of running around to do that. Well, I'm happy to say we finally support that completely, just the same as any file texture, right? So Ptex is fully supported in the Maya viewport, as well as for rendering, just the same as any other texture file, which is excellent. I'm not sure if that kind of...
I think that does it. Another question that just came in from Red Mike. Noob question, is there a way to try out different weights of the same stroke, kind of similar to the way the blend shapes double on top of each other? Not exactly... I mean, beyond... Red Mike, feel free to clarify this. Are you talking about just a way to, like, you draw the stroke and then you can up and down the strength of that stroke? Is that what you're talking about?
Could be, or I had mentioned before I'm not sure if this answers his question there, but the ability to use strength, much like opacity in like a Photoshop type of workflow, we can dial that in so that a good workflow often that we see in production is a lot of artists will push their blend shapes to an extreme when they're sculpting these up, so that way you have that if you need to push it to maybe that extreme need. But the nice thing with sculpting is you can always dial that back so that, if I want different weighting or strength of those different blend shapes, I can blend between using the simple strength of each layer, and I can merge those layers if I need to. I'm not sure if that's exactly...
Red Mike, let us know if that hits your question. Feel free to type in there again if there's something else. Let's see, what else we got in here? Why can't I define a project path or directory in Mudbox like I can in Maya?
I kind of touched on that. Let me show you. You can now. In 2015, we had a lot of users over the years want this functionality to work in there. So if you saw when I was sending this mesh over to Maya that popped up. I could define texture paths. But what we can also do, if I have, a bunch of different texture channels and texture layers, I might have 100 or 100 plus in there, and that can get, that's pretty robust to work with, right? So underneath the file export all paint layers, we now have this entirely new menu set that comes up, and this is where I can define path templates, right? So I can create all new path templates. You can see I can just keep building unlimited path templates in here. And these can be, I can send these to different areas, right? So if, for example, Hughes, if you and I are working together on something, I can send it to your directory, but maybe Sean might have a different requirement for textures that I can also have written to that directory. So it is essentially a lot like working in that kind of project directory space with your textures, so that you're not just, by default, we were typically stuck to the pref setting for Mudbox and your documents there. And now you can define to your pipeline's needs where you want to put it. So it's excellent. So it is a lot like working with that project directory specifically within the texture space.
I have a question actually. With regards to the blend shape set that you exported to Maya earlier, is there a way to actually reference this file in Maya to implement a rig on top of the file, and then only have the blend shapes being updated as we modify them?
So Mudbox supports FBX, skeletons, and weights. So if, for example, this character we had fully weighted with a skeleton in there, we can bring that into Mudbox. It will appreciate that for whether it's for posing, you want to use it for poses, or you want to build the blend shapes, and it will update that back onto your rigged mesh there as well.
Okay.
All that's really appreciating at that point is the weights of the skin to the bones, right? So the weights on the mesh to the bones. Any kind of rigging going on there, Mudbox doesn't care about that, or isn't going to.
Just ignores it.
It's going to ignore that. It's not going to see that. Yeah. Does that answer?
Yes, it does.
Is he allowed to ask questions here, Sean?
I'm going to let it happen. I'm going to let it happen.
All right. We'll let it go.
So another question here. I need to make holes in my Mudbox model using texture, but I don't know how to do it.
Okay,
do you have
so
any tips?
Yep, we had that come in online. So I'm not sure if this will give. This is kind of a couple different variations on how we can kind of work with that. Now, we saw earlier how we have the ability to actually, chip out faces and delete them right off of the mesh there, and then patch pieces of the mesh. But quite often what we'll deal with, there's this, I bring up this example here because this is kind of in the architectural visualization space. What is kind of cool about Mudbox is this free-form kind of exploring a concept sculpting. And all of this mesh actually is here is simply a plane, a polyplane, and it's taking advantage of modeling or sculpting based off of textures, and then simply using that same texture layer to drive opacity on it. So you have this simple little kind of waffle effect, and then we're just driving the opacity to kind of give that in there. So it is kind of a cheat, but for visualization purposes, it works well. And then if you take these textures and you export them out, you can actually use that elsewhere to define specific faces, much like you're doing in Mudbox if you wanted to select those based off of a texture and then continue the modeling into another, if you wanted to blow the faces away and extrude or close up the surface there. So just as an example with this, let me, maybe we can do something here. If we'll turn these, yeah, okay, so we're just working with this simple polyplane here. It's about 400,000 polys, that's fine. So underneath the diffuse, if I, let's bring in a texture. I'm going to just import a layer in there. Let's see where there we go. Let's go with, let me go with this radial one here. So if I just bring that in as a simple diffuse map, this is simple, just black and white. We have a way to actually sculpt from textures so that you can impact the mesh. And this is really powerful, especially for really fine sculpted detail. I'm not sure if you use this at all, Hughes. If you have specific requirements following like real tight line flow or details based off of a specific design, ornate design or something, this is excellent to work with this. And what you can do is just bring a texture in. You could paint the texture on. If you didn't have a UV layout, you could just simply create UVs or use Ptex and paint it on, or project it on simply here in Mudbox. In this case, I'm just placing it on the plane. But I can right-click and choose Freeze from Selected. And what that's going to do, let's create a new sculpt layer here. Let's turn off the texture. You can see that it's frozen all of the black off that texture, and what is left exposed is the geometry where the white was. And this is nice in the way that I can just go to a sculpt tool, for example, here. Let's, we don't want to go too high on that. We'll just keep the sculpt at whatever that's at, 7.8. And then hit flood. All that's going to do is just kind of push the geometry out. If I hit Shift U, we're turning off the frozen detail. And then, of course, I can dial in the strength, right? I can go to the negative side of that. I can also multiply that further. So maybe we want it to be something like 150, give a little more depth on it. And then in our paint layer, if we turn the paint layer back on, we can do some kind of interesting things here. Now, opacity is only going to take the black as complete opacity or transparency. So if I wanted to, I could just right-click and move this to the opacity menu there, and you're seeing we're left with that. But then if I right-click on that one and just go to the Adjust Color menu, I can simply grab an inverse, and boom, we've just essentially created a kind of a cutout effect of that. Sure, it's a bit of a cheat. We're using a texture, we're using opacity, but the bottom line is here, you're sculpting from the texture. So I could take that mesh and write it out, and it is a new model in that sense that is extruded or fine line work or whatever may be cut in there. Not sure if that answers the question, but that is a way that you can work with it.
Other questions here. Quick question: how to convert size and color depth of painting layers after creating it?
How to convert? Go ahead.
Then that's an easy one, actually. All you have to do is to create another texture below the one that you have already, and make sure that it is set to the bit depths that you want as a destination, and flatten your input texture onto this one, and it is converted.
Yeah.
That is it. Really.
That's excellent. Yeah, that's a great tip. Yeah, that is actually a great tip if you are working in even with resolution, right? This was before we opened up the texture layers to by default go up to 8K. You can go up to. You can actually go beyond that, right? So It depends on your hardware. So if you have a 16K map, you can use that in Mudbox. If your hardware will handle multiple 16K maps, you can certainly use that. And just like Hughes was saying in there, the way to get around that is have a layer, bring in a 16K layer, and you can merge them together if you're now working in that resolution, whatever it may be. I'm using 16K as an example, but yeah, good tips, good points, and the bit depth as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, so basically you can convert to anything you want.
exactly.
Next question here was, vector strokes in 2D illustration are paths that you can select after drawing and change their properties like width. I was wondering if Mudbox offered a similar kind of control.
So grabbing vector lines in a 2D format and then being able to actually adjust that on the go there. Well, we do have a curve workflow within within Mudbox that'll let you adjust the, you can work with the curves. But as far as that vector workflow of a closed-in vector, filled vector, and then being able to stretch that or define that on there, we don't have that ability to work in that 2D vector type of space in there. I think if I'm understanding correctly, they would like to be able to take, if you had a 2D vector arrow stretched across a mesh, and then be able to stretch or define or squash or whatever. Yeah, we don't have the ability to work directly with vectors in that sense, right? So, sorry.
Can't have everything. And then the person just said, "Thank you for doing this. This was very helpful." There you go. Let's see what else we got here. Anyone knows how can I make a tileable sculpting in Mudbox like in ZBrush wrap mode? I know tiling plane know this, but I want to achieve it with a custom mesh.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure I think I know what he's asking there, or she is asking there, that if we're working with, in Mudbox, we can make sculptable tile planes. That's very simple, but you are working with a plane that is by default. And you're able to build something that will be tileable just like a texture. So for example, the power in that is that you can build tileable sculpt maps, but also complicated ones, right, that have overhangs and undercuts, and you can use vector displacement to do a bunch of really interesting things with that. But I think the key word in there was wrappable, right? They mentioned, if you had a spherical object and you want it, you've made your tileable map, but you want it to seamlessly join together. Well, we don't have exactly that kind of line up there. Quite often what I do with that is I'll have my tileable sculpt map. I'll use that tiled out, and I'll sculpt on there, and then I'm just simply between layers, I'm sculpting or filling in that void to bring it together. But to appreciate the overall wrapping of the mesh, whether it's by UV layout or whatever it may be, we don't have that ability to recognize both ends of it to wrap it together. So you do have to get a little creative and sculpt or blend those layers together to have them meet up.
Another question I have here. I'm interested in Mudbox, but need to know if it's possible to convert exported Mudbox files .mud, .obj, etc. into a move file. I do a lot of work in After Effects for the web and would love to import characters created in Mudbox.
Converting Mudbox files into a movie, any kind of video format, no, you can't do that. It's a completely different setup there. But if you want the ability to bring what you're doing in Mudbox, if I understand the question here, if you want to be able to bring what you're seeing in Mudbox, you can render out .mov. That was the format specifically they're using, the QuickTime.mov. So you can render that out underneath the render menu. You can do a couple of things here. So I'm not sure if this answers specifically, but you could create a turntable movie in here, so you could have a turntable to mesh. That's an MOV movie. You can define your frame rate, and you can define the settings in here, and then you could bring that into your After Effects, whether it's a reel or whatever you're doing with that. As well, you can actually record a movie directly in here, and that would be if you're, for whatever it is you're doing, you wanted to show your process, right? You can record a time-lapse sculpt live in Mudbox and write that out as an MOV file, for example, or Flash, or we have all different formats in there, and then you could simply bring that into any kind of compositing or editing workflow. I'm not sure if that's specifically what they're asking there, but as far as any kind of animation or producing, any kind of movable asset in there for animation or rendering out a movie. Mudbox isn't about that, so we wouldn't be able to do that.
Now, a question that just came in. I'm excited about the new character generator tool. Have you played with modifying rigged characters like those exported from Character Gen in Mudbox while preserving weights? I think this kind of lends to his early question.
Yep. So Mudbox works excellent with any of the characters generated through that methodology there. As I mentioned before, Mudbox will respect any weighted bones on there via FBX. FBX is the back and forth there, and it will respect all weights on bones to the skinned mesh, regardless of the rig going on. So yeah, it works excellent for that. If you want to use it as a blend shape workflow or some sort of mesh correction tool, if there's something wrong with the rig, to be able to, maybe you want to build a fixable blend shape that in your pipeline you're turning on to fix deformable issues, like maybe in a character filing type of workflow. But yeah, the answer, it works great with those rigs and those meshes that come out of there.
Cool. We're at a bit of a lull right now in the online chat. Is there anything else specifically we want to talk about outside before I go to the last few written questions?
Maybe it would be a nice time to go back. You have a really nice Mudbox file open here with some nice dirt.
Yes, this is the last creation I made. It's an image that I created last week to illustrate some of my texturing techniques that I use in Mudbox in Bridge with Octane, where I can, as you mentioned earlier, have sets of textures that. There you go, with masks, just like in Photoshop. Like for instance, the dirt layer that I created on that character. There you go. Oh, I'm not having any luck with that pad.
He's trying to do this without having a stylus.
Yeah, a touchpad.
He's doing it on a touchpad on a laptop, so it's a little like working with mittens on.
Pretty much, yes. I'm glad I don't have to save a dying baby right now, because that wouldn't work. There we go. There we go. So yes, I had to create several layers of dirt on that character's face, and I could simply use the layering system that is available in Mudbox to create layers of blood or dirt in that case, where I could even use masks like that to create the dirt layers that were then passed once again to the rendering engine, and create very subtle effects like the one shown here with the dirt on her face that is getting carried away by the tears coming out of her eyes, which also are present in the Mudbox files. It's
using
very
layer masks.
Using layer masks, and it's very nice to be able to have your entire set of geometry and use it as a reference to paint your textures and pass them directly onto your
That's fantastic. So
render platform.
When you're working with the dirt layers, for example, on here, is there anything special or the way that you prefer to work with that? Are you blending layers together? Are you using the adjust color at all, or are you simply painting on with stamps or stencils to get that effect?
Essentially, yeah. When I work with Mudbox, I almost don't have any set that I have pre-built. I work essentially with all the default tools. I don't have any external input within Mudbox itself. I just paint with the base brushes. I find that it leaves the interface very uncluttered, and the brushes are simple enough to modify that I don't have to build a larger set of them to keep a huge data set that I don't recycle later. Everything is there from scratch, and that's it. But yeah, at worst, I might bring in some textures from outside to use as stencils.
Yep.
But nothing complicated ever. It's like a quick lookup on Google to find a splash texture or anything, and just save it to disk and use that as a stencil very quickly.
You mentioned before, I'm curious with your workflow here, where you render through Maya with Octane, and it's amazing if you put your final image back up there on the screen, and the same workflow in here with this girl, which again I love. You talked about earlier your references and your inspiration with tribal and different cultural work there. That's excellent. So that is directly out of Octane. That is not any kind of compositing or any
No,
touch-ups going on after?
there's nothing except for the frame itself, and there was a little bit of color correction, but
Right.
it is straight out of Octane, and it just used essentially all the meshes that I've pushed out of Mudbox itself, and that's it really. A lot of it is actually not even textured. There are functions within Octane to actually pick on the detail that you push into the mesh,
Right.
and to essentially pull it out. Like the little medallion on her head has actually no textures at all.
Right.
It's straight information taken from Mudbox itself. Every little indentation and
fantastic.
anything like that. Yeah.
And so I'm curious here with your painting workflow that you were showing, how often are you working with externally with something like Photoshop, or do you work at all with Photoshop outside of Mudbox? Or?
I do, but it's not very often that I take any textures from Mudbox to modify in Photoshop. The most that I will do is for normal processing to for instance generate bump maps from normal maps and things like that. So automation essentially,
Sure.
conversion or sharpening, these kind of things. But in general, yeah, I'm just happy to with the textures that I have in Mudbox to just push them in any destination platform that I'm using. Yeah.
That's amazing, and you're finding the tools that you're using in there within the paint system there, and with adjust colors or any of the other tools are giving you everything you need.
Yes.
You're working
Well,
on.
my approach, as I said earlier, is very painterly. I don't try to go for very realistic details or anything like that. So I can just iterate very easily,
Right.
adding more noise here and there, or sharper details. But I don't need to bring it into any other software
Sure.
packages. It's
Excellent.
straightforward, especially since most of the layering features that are present in Photoshop are also available in Mudbox itself. It has happened that I pushed entire sets of documents towards Photoshop for minor editing, adding tiny little photographic details here and there. But that's the beauty of it. You can push the entire document into Photoshop, and it's pretty much entirely compatible.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So got a few questions that have come in since. Let's see here. Now, I'm not entirely sure I'm understanding this. I think you might have missed a word in the typing or something, but I have the latest version of Mudbox 2014 and I have problem with option adjust color on layer, which is painting mask. Value option doesn't. It should. So I'm assuming the adjust color is not adjusting the color on a painting mask?
Oh, for a layer mask. Okay, well, let's look at that. So actually, that is a good question. So what I believe they're asking is that they simply want to take just like you work with regular paint layers, they want to be able to adjust the color on a layer mask. Well, I'm happy to admit that that is a bug that we have that's in fix. I actually have the bug number on that. That is being fixed right now. But there's workarounds on that. And the way that you can work with this, if if I had this layer here, let's just duplicate the layer. If I have a layer that I want to work with as a layer mask, if I'm using this, I mean, this is the exact same texture on here, so I'm essentially masking the diffuse with the same texture here. If I want to adjust the color on that, what's happening here is you're able to go into the adjust color menu, and you are able to adjust a bunch of things here, but you can see we're not getting the update. Therein lies the bug. But the workaround for that is just simply to drag up and work in the diffuse space and be able to do your adjustments, as it were, on there and get your updates to what you want and bring it in. Keep in mind, though, as well, that when you're working with layer masks, at the end of the day, you're pretty much confining your color space to 0 to 1. You're working within a grayscale area there. So if there are specific hues or colors you want to work with, I would encourage to work in this sense. And then same thing, once we get the bug update out there, you'll want to solo that as a diffuse anyways to see your results, to adjust the color. So that is a bit of a workaround. It's easy. Just drag it out, adjust what you need to do, then drag it back on top as a layer mask in there to work with it.
So here's another question. Lately I've been using Mudbox to detail large environments, but in order for Mudbox to display the models, I need to scale them way down in max before sending them over. Is there a way around this?
Oh, that's interesting. So they're actually having a visual display issue? Is that how you're interpreting it?
I think, yeah, it's
Okay.
it's a scale.
So that's interesting. So if they're working in Max and they have an environment at probably set up in their preferred scale they're working
For
with,
scale,
so
and it
that's
sounds like it's probably in the, my guess is usually when I hear people say that it might be like it's hundreds of thousands of units,
yeah,
that kind of thing.
exactly. So I bring that up because then if Max is their platform, then they want to preserve the scale there and leave
Yeah.
that there. So I mean, you can certainly scale objects, as you know, underneath in Mudbox. You can scale, rotate, translate, of course, to do it there. But it's probably safe to preserve that system going on in Max. The only thing that comes to mind there, if they're not able to see that, they should be able to see that giant data set there. There is a substantial difference between the way the camera presents itself in Mudbox and Max, as it does between Mudbox and Maya. So that could be something as simple as the way Mudbox handles its clipping planes. I wonder if they're seeing, their
Clipping
big
it out.
data set with that kind of
Tiny
hole,
clipping plane
yeah,
space.
cut into there. I mean, I'd be curious to see how they're working with that. But essentially, they can go into the object list here and adjust those clipping planes. There's the near plane and far plane, and see if that helps out with what they're doing. Because at the end of the day, you want to preserve the scale that you have set in your Max
environment.
scene, and then be able to work with it in that detail back and forth. So, I'm wondering if it is something as simple as adjusting clipping planes.
It's hard to say without being able to see the data.
Yeah.
'Cause, you run into it could be those things, and sometimes you find that we've got a large scene, but for whatever reason we're forced to work in like centimeters or something
Sure.
like that. So it's just ridiculously large numbers that
Yeah.
start to get used, which could cause its own sets of problems. Not sure how Mudbox deals with those kind of things. Most 3D packages can have some issues.
Yeah, so within Mudbox, a unit is a unit. We don't specifically define specific units. We do have in preferences that you can define, units of measurement there. But as far as units work, we don't necessarily work in the sense of matching up to the real world units and as precisely maybe as Max or Maya is doing. But with that, we actually have in 2015, in 2014 extension we brought up, we do have this caliper tool. I don't know if you play with this at all, Hughes, but you can use this to measure, this is handy for proportion when you're sculpting, right? But also to match scale to other objects. So if you're building something within Mudbox and it has to match the scale of another object, you can use the caliper tool back and forth to kind of align and work with that. It also is segmented, so you can define that or segment the entire thing. We added this kind of cool thing, so if you can stick it on the surface. So especially if you were sculpting with proportions and you wanted to keep your measurement, your reference frame of reference for measurement there, what you could do, let's just grab a sculpt layer on there. If you deform the mesh, you'll see that the tool is going to snap to that point where it was, right? So it's going to preserve that, especially if you're working with your caliper tool as preserving proportion, between the eyes, for example, you deform the eyes or change that, it's going to keep your caliper there so that you have that as a frame of reference. But so that is a useful thing to work with scale, using it as a reference point, the caliper tool for scale.
And is there a way to pass that information onto Maya through a measure tool or anything like that? No.
As it stands right now, it is more of a visual, for proportion, for reference to, you're seeing a distance value on here that you're using, to measure between the proportion of something, the specific proportions on a face, and
Understood,
you can use that as your reference back and forth between those different proportions there.
So another question that's come in here is actually for Hughes. Thinks your work is so natural. Could he talk about any tricks for his realistic hair and cloth?
Whoa.
Dive right on in there.
Well, realistic, I don't know. I don't really work in realism myself, but when I work with cloth, I actually use Maya mainly as a start. I don't have any examples right here, but I have created an illustration actually, which is, there we go. Let me pull it out. There. All right, it's a little bit non-safe for work, but the back of the illustration is set on a cloth background. And that class was initially created within Maya. I just did a quick end class setup with a few pins and laid it onto the stage several times until I found a decent looking shape. Then passed it on to Mudbox, retopologized it automatically so that I could sculpt it without having too many deformations, and then rearranged the fabric layers, the fabric itself within Mudbox by sculpting it, and then passed it on to Octane Render once again. And in that case, there was no texture; it was done entirely procedurally, and because it allows me to go into great details, especially in that case because I wanted to be able to render it into a very large size. So, unfortunately, in that specific case, all the textures are procedural. So I don't have any specific tricks for that. But if I were to do it in Mudbox, I would probably use again a system of layers to define the thread directions.
Yeah.
Probably a checkerboard and just stripes that I could weave direct. It's really sad I can't show it right there, but it would be like every fabric pattern is made from a weft and a vertical thread,
Right.
and we can composite them using just a simple checkerboard and a layer for each of those thread directions.
Yep.
And they go into, and we use the checkerboard to composite them essentially, the vertical ones and the horizontal ones, and we can that way create a weaving pattern, which is essentially what I've done here, and I've added extra layers of noise ultimately in the renderer to create this little stubble effect on the fabric surface. But yeah, initially it was done in Maya, then passed on to Mudbox for refining.
Excellent. Now, the other part of the question was hair. We might, I don't know if tomorrow in the Maya session, maybe we might touch on that a bit, but if you want to talk just quickly about how you work with hair. Or
Well, until now, especially for the one that the first one that I showed, I created the hair partially in Maya as well. It was resculpted in Mudbox as well. There you go. Where the hair at the end of her locks was created in Maya using paint effects, then converted to polygon, and I just used in that case a camera projection for the UVs and painted the mud on the hair itself in Mudbox. But it was one very simple orthogonal texture, and the same at the top of her hair was created within Maya as well, and brought in Mudbox in order to clump it below the mud locks there.
Excellent.
That's it. I don't have a lot more experience so far. The last one
Your
I have
latest
worked on,
image there,
the latest one I've done is entirely done in Maya. This one. Except for some minor details, but those were curves that were aggregated in Maya, then spread out using simple blend shapes for the curves themselves, and then passed on to paint effects to generate geometry that was then passed on to the rendering engine.
Excellent.
Now, another question that's come in here is, can we work with vector displacement and Ptex at the same time?
Yes. The answer to that is yes. So well, I'll answer that in a couple different ways here. So one is if it's in a render workflow that they're specifically asking, yes, absolutely. You can handle Ptex format for your vector displacement at render time, depending on whatever render engine you're working with. If it supports that, for example, RenderMan, Mental Ray, V-Ray, you can work with the Ptex format. Will support all of that without issue. Interestingly enough, my Viewport 2.0 now actually supports VDM in the viewport, and you can do that with Ptex there as well. So that's one side, and then the other side was, just to answer, I'm not sure if they were asking that, I might have answered there, but if in Mudbox you're working with Ptex as your Ptex painting workflow, and you want to work with vector displacement for the sculpting side of things, stamp stencils, absolutely, it works great with that. That you're just updating your sculpt while you're painting back and forth. So you're sculpting and you're seeing your mesh deform or sculpt as you have your painting workflow there as well. The other thing to point out in the paint layers, we have a lot of people might not be aware of this, but when we go to the extract texture map operation and we use vector displacement map to extract a vector displacement map off your mesh, when we're finished with that, you're going to see down here, we do call it preview as vector displacement map. It's not really a preview in the sense, but why we put that there is that when you extract that map, just like with normal maps, it's going to open that up, or even ambient occlusion, it's going to bring that, stack that into your paint layer so you can see it, right? And you can work with it, you can multiply it, whatever you want to do, like an ambient occlusion, for example, multiplying it. But with vector displacement maps, it's going to create a vector displacement channel. It's going to put that map in there. Visually, it's not going to do anything in your viewport. The reason why we put that there is for that interop connect ability for rendering. So that when you send that mesh, for example, over to Maya, it's going to automatically hook up that vector displacement map for you for render time. And so that is awesome, right, to be able to have that connected live for you so that whether it's in the viewport or at render time, it's linked right up for your shading workflow.
Perfect. All right, going to one of the last questions we had that was pre-submitted. This one was need help. I'm new here, so I don't know what to do in this situation. I imported my low poly model from Maya. UVs should be okay. Then in Mudbox, subdivide my mesh to 6 levels, and when using smaller brush, I get these jaggy edges. Sometimes in front side it's kind of fine, but on sides it's almost always jaggy. Please, my mesh size is almost the same as Mudbox default head. Please help me.
There can be a number of answers for that. I would have to see the mesh, but from what I'm gathering there, they're bringing the mesh in, a mesh that they've built elsewhere, they're bringing it in, they're subdividing and they're sculpting, and they're seeing jagged or, something that's not preferred in sculpting there. My first guess would be that they're seeing, poor topology. It doesn't matter what the package is, whether it's Mudbox, Maya Max, or any other package out there that works with subdivision. If your topology isn't uniformly laid out, you're going to have differences at times, especially at sculpting with subdivision. So if your topology is not uniformly laid out, the mesh will not subdivide uniformly. So as a result, you will see that at sculpt time. You're going to see nice, smooth, clean areas, and the areas that it's not as uniform or as packed densely as the other areas, you're going to see a big difference. You're going to get jaggeds,
right.
Jaggies.
Just because you upped it a level doesn't mean it uniformly scattered polys everywhere.
And which is also a good thing, right? Because you may not want that depending on what you're doing there. But I did a webinar that talks about. I really kind of hammer home the principles of modeling, just following good topology, and the reason why. We have all these tools to do retopology today, and I love the idea of forget topology and create. And then worry about retopology later. But if you have to create a base mesh from scratch, wherever it may be, it's always a good principle to follow, good topology, because if you want to bring it into a sculpting workflow, wherever that may be, you want it to subdivide properly so that you're going to get a nice clean subdivision, a nice clean sculpting workflow. I'm not sure, Marley, are you going to put the webinar link in there? On the chat window, I think I've got a webinar that Marley's pulled up. I think she'll put the YouTube link there. And it's a creature modeling and sculpting workflow, and it's I
She's
do kind of
as we speak.
Okay, I kind of hammer the idea of following good optimized topology or meshes and some tips and tricks in there as to how you may want to achieve that. So that would be my guess from that question. I haven't seen the mesh, but it sounds like it may be uneven or non-uniform topology, so at subdivision you're getting that.
Yeah, in some places it would be perfect, in others it's a big square.
Sure.
All right, so that's all the questions that were pre-submitted that we've gone through. So I'm going to give everyone a few seconds just to post any last questions in the chat window, whether we have any other things just amongst the three of us we want to chat about, because the outside world is on a 40-second delay to what I say, so they're not even hearing this yet.
So you guys have 40 seconds to censor us. In case
exactly.
It'd be great to take advantage of having Hughes here. And is there anything else that maybe you wanted to show, anything at all? I think everyone out there is probably loving having you here and seeing your amazing work and your workflow. You know what we could talk about is your website. I don't know if we put that up. What is your website?
So that would be www.3dpeyote.net.
3D Peyote. Yep.
Yes.
Peyote.
Exactly.
Okay, there might be a story to that we might be able to discuss here, but
Censored.
I would have to describe your work as definitely 3D Peyote. That's for sure. It's awesome. Great work there. So definitely check out Hugh's website there as well, and you can follow on Twitter. 3D,
Yes,
3D
I have probably 20 followers. So yeah, it's a big media
we might
push
see it
there.
expand.
At the end of this, you might be up to 22. So we did have a question come in. Just wondering if you can take fluid sim shapes to sculpt in Mudbox. And I know someone had responded that Wayne Robson had some sort of workflow for this as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking as soon as that question came in, Wayne, for sure, he's done some really cool stuff with that. So the answer to that, the short answer to that is yes. If you, regardless of what package you're using for Fluid Sim, if you have the ability to, build an ISO surface or the end result, a mesh, right, that you're using, and you grab that frame or that cache or that frame and you write out that piece of geometry, you could bring that into Mudbox and sculpt that further. So, Wayne Robson you brought up there, he did some awesome stuff for, I believe it was for, it was some sort of, I don't know if it was some sort of booze ad campaign or something, but it was like splashing and pouring kind of whiskey, and he did a beautiful job with that. And in fact, what he did there was, it was purely sculpted in Mudbox. He actually didn't even
start with a sim?
No, he just sculpted what he needed for that ad, right? He used Mudbox to produce that kind of fluid look, and then he had the control layers to be able to adjust what he needed without having to worry about a sim, right? So pretty simple and pretty powerful way to define that, especially for stills, right? But you could do some kind of cool things for subtleties with different shapes or something like that if you wanted to bring that into a package, right, between fluids.
So I've got a couple other ones here. So there seems to be a lot more integration with Maya versus Max for Mudbox 2015. Was this due to customer demand? Probably not the best session to ask this in. It probably would have been better asked in the Max or the Maya sessions that were earlier, because there you would have had the product managers of those products, and there they'd be the drivers behind what goes in. But I'm sure to a certain extent there was probably a consumer demand area. So if these are things you want to see more of this stuff going into Max, then absolutely go to the user voice websites and put them in there and get people talking about them, because the teams are definitely paying attention to those things. So you want to make sure that you raise the level of those questions. Another question here, I'm extracting marged texture maps. Does marged mean anything to you? I'm going to say large. Merged? Large? Merged?
Maybe he or she are referring to the texture maps as marged?
Yeah, it could be. I'm extracting, let's go with merged.
Okay.
I'm extracting merged texture maps from new objects to another one, which has almost same topology but different mapping. Often result is few duplicates of same map. Why not only one?
I'm not sure if I'm exactly following what's going on there. It sounds like they're working with, as we guessed, merged maps.
Yep.
And they're transferring that painting workflow to another mesh. That's
Sounds like it, yep.
Different layout. And
Same topology basically, or very close, but different mapping.
okay.
Often results in few duplicates of same map. Why? I'm not sure. That's the part I'm not quite sure I'm getting.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they would be seeing there. If the issue is they're using the transfer paint layers, you have the option to add or replace to existing paint layers on an object if there are any. You shouldn't be seeing duplication of layers, so I'm not familiar with that. I haven't experienced or seen or heard of anyone having that issue. I'd like to see more what they're seeing
I've
specifically.
had a
entirely
couple of
possible.
instances of issues like that, where when extracting a paint layer, Mudbox saves multiple tiles, even though there is only one present.
Okay, so
We've hit something.
okay, so that could be an issue. So if you're seeing your maps writing out with a multi-tile arrangement on there, right? You know, like you're seeing, kind of the V and the U and the V space as 0 to 1 or whatever, or 0 to 2, or that is indication that there are tiles going on in that scene. So the interesting thing about that is that's where I would encourage you to take a look at the UV view within Mudbox, but back in whatever product you're using, whether it's Maya Max or whatever it may be, there are the odd times where you can have what you think is in one tile, but you can have a little UV sitting out there. And that is, if you're getting that, typically what's happening, it could be as simple as a pixel
Yes.
that is representing a UV space, is maybe sitting out, over here, and that's, if there is one, even if there's one little pixel off here in UV space and it's out on this fourth tile over here, it is going to write out 0, 1, 2, 3. It's going to write that
All
right
the
out.
It
across
doesn't
the
even
board.
have to be to be that far off. It can be just on the edge itself. I've
you'll get
noticed a small discrepancy
That's right.
within Maya and Mudbox sometimes.
So that is an interesting little tip. Just with whenever you're working with UVs, whatever package you're in, and you're going to bring it to Mudbox to paint. By default,
Yeah.
we have an edge bleed, and you can adjust that. You can tighten that or extend that out for so you don't have any seam issues there. But it's always good practice to make sure that your UVs are not laying on the edge.
Precisely.
Mudbox does not like that. So
Always leave a little padding.
keep a little gap, and you're going to definitely prevent that unwanted tile issue from happening. I think we've nailed it. I think that's
that
what
was-
they were asking. Yeah. So
We had to wander in the fields a
That's
little
right,
bit to
yeah.
get there, but we did. Okay, last question I've got here. And again, in the time it takes for him to answer this, you have time to ask a few more. Is there any favorite new things for you in 2015? Are things we haven't talked about that you think they'll just call that out?
I would have to say the biggest thing going on there is the our grouping of layers, because of where that's going. It's fine to organize all your different texture layers or different texture channels within there, or sculpt layers as well. But this idea of what the groups represent outside of Mudbox, right? So as an example, what we're seeing with the blend shape workflow, that it's interpreted directly as a blend shape node there in Maya. So, I mean, it's a useful workflow within there. I think we've had a lot of artists that have been screaming for that, as I showed earlier, the texture path, to be able to define different texture paths, multiple texture paths, or whatever it may be. That's excellent, especially for a pipeline. The cool thing about the way that's been built is it doesn't matter what your rendering workflow is or what your shading workflow is. It doesn't matter what kind of shaders you're using. Mudbox doesn't need to care what that shader is. It just cares about the paths. So your shader, regardless of what rendering workflow you're working with, those paths will always be updated live from Mudbox as you work. So this is something that you'll probably enjoy with your rendering workflow there, the painting and live rendering in Octane. So
Pretty much, yeah. I actually point Octane directly to the source textures that Mudbox saves, and
Yeah.
I don't even have to save them separately. It just refreshes pretty much automatically.
sure, great.
All right, I don't see any new questions in the chat window at the moment, so I'm going to say that we've had a good session, and I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in and sending in their questions, those that sent them in ahead of time as well as those who are participating. I'd definitely like to thank Hughes for coming out and joining us with this. It was very, very useful, and also great to see the fantastic work. Always look forward to seeing the new ones appear on the area and other places. So with that, again, thank you very much, everyone. Tomorrow we will have 2 more sessions. We will have the 3ds Max tips and tricks and the Maya tips and tricks session, so come back for those. Hughes will be here for the Maya one as well. And have a good night.